Hello, welcome to episode 43 of Scuttlebutt. I'm Nick. I'm here with Vic.
Hey, I'm back.
Back in town, and we got William here.
Howdy.
We're all in-house, and today's episode, of course, is brought to you by our friends at Service Credit Union. We'll get to them in a minute. But Vic, in-house.
Yes.
You were out in California for the last little while. Anything interesting happen?
For 3 months, man, it was quite the little journey.
Yeah.
Hopefully you guys have enjoyed some of the interviews that I was doing while I was out there. But yeah, it was a really great time. It's really great. It was great to be home. It was great to be near the beach.
It's great to visit some Marines.
I mean, always great to visit some Marines. But I mean, here on Quantico, it's hard,
You just went from one Marine capital to the other,
they throw a football and hit 5 of them without even realizing it, and then obviously turning and running away. But it was awesome. It was Cali. I mean, we went to the Marine Corps Association hosted their West Coast dinner, and I was able to be in attendance for that, and so it was great to sort of be back. I will say, every area has its flavor. Yeah, and being on the West Coast, not to be cliche, but there is it was just good to be back in the Fleet Marine Force, especially my old stomping ground. All my fleet tours were on the West Coast, and so it was just great to be back amongst the Marines, in the area. There was just a feel of readiness, of esprit de corps. Not that you don't get it here at the Crossroads. I mean, there's a ton here, but there's just a difference of being with the Victor units and Marines being celebrated for doing their accomplishments. It was a lot of fun. It was a great dinner, and then being able to sit down and just absorb what all these Marines are doing, active. And now that they're out and just being sort of back in the culture, it was cool. It was a great visit.
Awesome. So I don't know if you know this, but you kind of created a little mini series because a lot of the guests you're talking to have started businesses. They're like entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Were you getting that vibe? Like, that wasn't planned, right? That was just these are guys that have great stories and
I think it really fit in with what we're trying to do with the show. That every story matters, and your story doesn't end once you get out of uniform. And as you heard from a lot of the guests that we had, I mean, their stories began before they were in uniform. And I think all the services have this, but I think the Marine Corps in particular, it's the culture that I know. It really, especially as we're looking at force design and we're talking about talent management. I mean, could you imagine if we had to retain some of these critical thinkers, these entrepreneurs, the things that we would be able to do, especially as we're looking at, the great power competition. I mean, these are the types of people that we need to be going after, and then obviously retaining, because look at what they did when they came out of uniform. I mean, there wasn't just this across the spectrum. We had Benji Manabog, who was just took that everything the Marine Corps gave him prior to joining. Everything that the Marine Corps gave him, and now he's applying it to his future endeavors. Paul Greaves is literally changing how, he's on the forefront of how we're changing the way we look at agriculture and farming. Nick Colt, I mean, dude, that guy, I can't tell you how unbelievable he is, and he's still doing all this great work for the city of Long Beach. I mean, the list goes. Aaron Sullivan can't stop making things happen. So it was such a great time. It was really
all right. And then before we go to our quick commercial break, for our listeners who aren't in California, how are gas prices?
They are challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's get a Sam's Club membership, I guess is where I'm going with that. Because if you go to a normal pump, man, you're looking at $650 just for 87 for regular.
Or if you have a 65,000, you can just buy a Tesla.
You get the Tesla,
very easy, very simple.
And,
it pays for itself after a few years, I think.
And if you are in Quantico or nearabouts, Virginia's got a new gas tax coming in that was passed 2 years ago. So paid at the pump.
It's a pain in the gas.
Pain in the gas. Oh, Vic, it's good to have you back.
Dad
All right.
jokes, yep.
All right. So without any further ado, we'll let Nancy talk to us a little bit about Service Credit Union and be with you guys on the other side.
This episode of Scuttlebutt is sponsored by Service Credit Union. Our friends at Service Credit Union have been serving military, veterans, and their families for over 65 years. You might know that they provide mortgages, including VA loans as well as auto and personal loans. But did you know that they now have a loan specifically for the iBot mobility device? For those who don't know, the iBot is a revolutionary device that goes above and beyond what a traditional mobility device can do. It can go up curbs, navigate stairs and snow, and even rise up to 6 feet. Of course, this device also comes with a high cost that isn't usually covered by insurance. So Service Credit Union has stepped in to help provide its members with financing, with no money down and terms up to 72 months. For more details, visit servicecu.org/ibot.
All right, guys. Is that an ad read or is that an ad read?
Love it.
It is an ad read.
Thanks again to Service Credit Union for joining us. They are the first company to jump on
Yeah,
board.
it was it's so cool, man, that they wanted to support us in what we're doing. So thank you to them.
All right. And then, so kind of in the news today, kind of like it's kind of been building up and brewing for a while. Marine Corps Doctrine Plan, MCDP.
Marine Corps Doctrinal Publication.
Publication, number 8.
Yeah, this is the problem with the vernacular. Like, when acronyms become the way that we speak,
They lose meaning.
Yeah.
well, when I was at Advanced Armor, which is now a maneuver captain's course, the CEO of the schoolhouse came in and people were talking. Obviously, he's asked us questions. People were talking, and everyone was responding in acronyms. He just stopped us, and then anytime you used one, you'd have to define it in order to continue talking.
I wish our authors did that.
And luckily, there were a lot. But I mean, it was funny to see how many soldiers and the only other Marine that was in the course with me like would stumble over like even something like OODA loop. Like you couldn't keep talking unless you could actually speak say what. So yeah, MCDP.
Yeah, as the civilian in the editing process for Gazette, I always just like, Vic, what is this? I've stopped even trying because there's so many overlapping ones too. It's like,
The sad thing is, there's so many overlapping, but yeah, I'm embarrassed to admit how many times I have to just go into a Google search.
Yeah.
and pray to God it's the right
And
one.
so much of it is kind of redundant because there's a Mick everything, right? Everything is Scottish. It's a Mick DP. It's a Mick PP. It's a Mick.
Yeah, or an X. There's always or an X at the end.
Yeah, so I'm touching it. So for those who are our lovely Marine listeners, in June of 2022, they released MCDP-8 information, and which coincides with adding information as the 7th warfighting function. And so for those who have not read it yet, it's actually pretty unique and different document compared to a lot of the MCDPs. And actually, here's my excerpt for why you should read this and why it's important, and also continually reread it. I quote, "This publication must, therefore, be updated with a frequency that keeps it relevant. It is not a checklist and does not contain all the answers. It should be read from cover to cover to provide a baseline for all Marines. How we employ this foundation is limited only by the creativity, ingenuity, and foresight of all Marines, all of whom are practitioners of the theories and applications discussed within these pages. Every Marine has a role in information. Therefore, every Marine should focus on their role as discussed in this publication, whether as a commander, planner, or squad member." I have read parts of it. I briefly skimmed over to get a feel of it, but it's like MCDP-1. It's very written for a variety of your educational level. Like I said, a squad member, a planner, or a commander could read this and disseminate it very well. And the idea that it is actually will hopefully be continually updated with new and relevant context and information, because it's 2022, baby. Information's running at the speed of chaos at this point. So to try to stay up to date in this field, and it's a good thing that the Marine Corps decided to go ahead and do this, especially the fact that, I mean, as we're seeing in the Ukraine-Russia war, which we'll discuss later, that information is a weapon, is a tool, and it needs to be taken with great consideration.
Now, the Marine Corps has been operating in the information space for decades, right?
Well,
So why is it now that we have
well,
a document for it?
let's clarify what we mean by information, and I think it's important to differentiate information as a warfighting function by what we have been doing for the past. I mean, I would say longer. I would say, even something as simple as dropping pamphlets.
Like in Nicaragua, right?
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, hell, yeah. To that case, I mean, you talk about Noriega. Just blasting Black Sabbath for 48 hours until he just gives up. I mean, that is a form of information. But we were very limited, sort of in our even understanding. One of the ways that we integrated it, going into Phantom Fury, you were dropping pamphlets, letting them know, hey, we're coming in. You got. Anybody after this date that's still here, we're going to consider a combatant, and it's going to be on, which, helped move a lot of folks out and obviously opened up avenues for a maneuver. But we just really didn't understand the synergy or even what it meant to have non-kinetic effects on the battlefield. When I was with RCT-5, after my time in Marja, I got moved up to take over the effects cell for the RCT-5, and I had an information officer. I had non-governmental representatives, and we were really trying to look at this sort of holistic approach to what it meant to use non-kinetics as in the same way that you would use kinetic fires, and to have effects on the battlefield that would shape sort of the campaign plan or help facilitate the campaign plan. But I mean, I wasn't an IO guy, obviously. I'm an Amtracker. So a lot of what we were doing was OJT, and there was nothing doctrinal. It was really just who sort of, for lack of a better term, who gets it, and then put them in get some other subject matter experts within that sort of cell, that staff, and that works with your intel cell and all this stuff to help shape the battlefield. But we really, even just talking about it, like, what does it really mean to shape a battlefield? I think that's what MCDP-8 is doing here.
Yeah. So to answer your question, Nick, it really especially in first chapter really explains, because the term information, how it's used and how it's applied for the Marine Corps, and has very different meanings. So again, all Marines, you were asked to read this. You should read this. For the love of God, as the tax-paying American, God-fearing citizen of this country, I ask you to read it. But some quick spark notes for you. So how information is used and understood according to MCDP-8. It has several definitions. So for instance, start off with information as an instrument of national power. More like grand scope of how information is applied. Then you have command and control, so how information is used on, like, for the more specific, like, military, Marine Corps unit level. And then you have the information environment, so where information plays into, like, social, cultural, psychological, technical, physical factors for just the general, like, the area where you're operating in. Information advantages, essentially, to quote unquote, Marines apply our maneuver warfare philosophy to gain and maximize advantages over competitors or adversaries. Information advantage is an exploitable condition resulting from one actor's ability to generate, preserve, deny, and project information more effectively than other. And then the final information term they use is information as a warfighting function, which again plays into essentially how Marines can apply information warfighting to create and exploit information advantages in pursuit of mission objectives.
So, yeah, in the macro, that makes sense. So, where are we... Okay, so we're looking at a lot of things with the Marine Corps changing, Force Design 2030, EABO. Where do we try and envision doctrinizing information in, like, an EABO environment?
So I guess I would refer back to our conversation we had with Annie Milburn. A lot of what we do in application, because the understanding, like, we're still very much into the lab work. of this stuff. So I mean, we got the Bunsen burners on our beakers going.
Yeah.
We're combining stuff together and see what actually where the reactions are occurring. And unfortunately, and I think the Marine Corps is making a shift now to take out some of the sterile sort of control of our training evolutions, all of these X's we talked about, where intelligence and information are sort of already baked in to the calculus, and so commanders don't really have to flex that muscle because it's already sort of there, like they're force-fed the information, and the evaluators are really just looking at how battle staffs sort of disseminate that and get it down at the field level, which is all, you'd have to see that, like. But when it comes to sausage making, when you know your ingredients, if you put together all these things, I know I'm going to get a brat.
Yeah.
Or if I put all these things together, I'm going to get a hot Italian or whatever. But when you start having more nebulous or ambiguous controls, then you can really see like, all right, well, if you take these certain things and it processes through the battle staff, is the battle staff really having to exercise, or are they just falling into a predetermined sort of scripted sort of thing? And so I guess it's sort of a long way to say that, like, I'm not really sure necessarily what it's going to look like. We have our theories, but until we really have a no kidding war game, and we have these training exercises that really challenge commanders to utilize these stats, because that was one of the things that Andy was talking about, is that every time they would go through the debrief, like, you have these SMEs, these subject matter experts on your staffs, but you're not using them, or you just have them as watch officers or something like that.
Yep.
And so, like, when it comes time to do this stuff, where are you even going to know how to? And we talk about his experiences battling ISIS, where, I mean, he even had something, a smart guy who knows web stuff going in there and basically trolling ISIS websites.
Yeah.
I mean, that's awesome. But I mean, that's sort of that really ingenuity, that outside the box sort of thinking that it's going to require. And I think MCDP-8 here is going to really encourage commanders. But also the Marines themselves need to understand that this is what the Marine Corps is looking for, and to sort of offer up their expertise.
Yeah. To be more specific to your question about like EABO and relating to MCDP-8, I mean, it's the idea that like a lot of these expeditionary advanced bases are going to be in places where people live there. So like what means and modes of communication, how do they get their information, where do they get for information, are things that would drastically need to be considered in a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you can even, if you were to apply it, and I'm just obviously thinking very hypothetically here, but I mean, if you're concerned about having to do resupplies on an EAB, because it's obviously not supposed to be there, you'd have to send out an information campaign across, various mediums that would talk up an exercise, so that when a resupply barge or whatever, however you would do it, would come into that area, it would just look like it's part of this like multilateral training exercise, so you could do drop off resupply stuff and not have it sort of skyline the EAB that's on this place that's not supposed to be.
And this also might
like that.
tie. This could be like also the start of the next part of our discussion. On the way here, I was listening to a podcast updating on like the Ukraine war and talking about how a lot of civilians, there's, I guess, like applications or some web space where civilians can report like, oh, there is a Russian tank in my yard. I see infantry moving this position, and you can relay that information back to the Ukrainian military. So this idea, this brings in also like the issue of like now our civilians general targets because of just the way social media is to relay information on your phone.
So is that information or is that intelligence?
Yes.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, it's yes. Another way that you could think about it is if, I mean, a really great model, and granted the mediums at this point maybe are antiquated, but the Arab Spring, I mean, that didn't just spark up because of some like dedicated campaign. Obviously, it hit like almost a dozen countries, all spread through very open source mediums like WhatsApp and Twitter and Facebook. and things like nature. So I mean, these, and that was a strict, I mean, a straight information campaign that created that. Now where it's not nested within something more strategic and it's not nested within a campaign plan, is you saw then the implosion of all of these regimes. So I mean, within a very short time, you had celebration of a democratized Arab, an Arab Spring of democratized nations, all of a sudden becoming hotbeds for extremist activity. And the reason is because those efforts aren't nested within a larger strategic campaign plan.
And also on top of that, I mean, those insurgencies were able to
use the information
environment to get control of it. And going back to Ukraine, you can make an argument that Ukraine's ability to control the information environment to a large degree, especially being on the defensive, has given them gave them a great advantage over Russia, especially in the initial phase of the war.
Yeah. And you can really force an opponent to reveal a lot about itself. And so, the Gazette has been talking a lot about this, and I've really liked a lot of the articles that are coming down the pike. But one of the things that we need to revisit that we haven't really since World War II, or at least not at the operational and tactical level, is deception operations. When you talk information ops, man, deception is a huge weapon in your toolbox, because one of the ways hey, I don't know where air defense radars may be. So then you just plug a bunch of information using various means, either tactile or on cyberspace, that then gets them to react.
Yeah.
And then potentially reveal positions. That's a huge thing, and that's something we'll also have, as we're talking EABs, we'll definitely have to be cognizant of, so that we're not constantly revealing our positions over and over again.
Yeah, like a good historical example of that, I guess, would be World War I, when all the information America got from the fronts came through England.
Well, I think what was the one that we read in the article? I think it was Tinian, the island, where the deception operation had the Japanese absolutely completely fooled, had moved like 2 divisions down to a southern port, and the Americans ended up landing at the northern part, which was totally canalizing. Only lost like 500 guys and took out like 5,000 Japanese, because it completely had them deceived and fooled about where they were going to make their landing.
Yeah. Yeah, so a lot of important reasons to make sure you're on the winning side of information.
Absolutely.
Both able to disseminate and translate what's coming back, like be able to defensively handle the other teams.
And we're looking at an EAB. Every Marine needs to read this, because when you're a company or a battalion alone and completely afraid, you need every Marine with his head on a swivel when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah, because if you're running up against a fanatical communist regime, like, they could send anything they want at you information-wise.
They could just overwhelm you. They could just overwhelm you. And your closest response, as of this point, as far as we understand EABO, I mean, your closest response could be, you could be in the South China Sea, and your closest response would be in Darwin, Australia, or up in Korea.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to handle that for a little while.
And the best way to handle it is read MCDP-8 information as soon as possible and disseminate. And also look forward for updates, because again, like this is not something you can remain stagnant on. It will be updated, hopefully regularly. So just to keep in touch with it.
Okay. All right, so MCDP-8 information is the 7th pillar of warfare. How'd you phrase that?
So information is the 7th warfighting function.
Warfighting function, okay. All right, I got to make sure I get my nomenclature right. Now I'm confused, because there's 7 functions but 8 MCDPs.
And the best way to get your nomenclature right is to read a Marine Corps Gazette and Leatherneck, but mostly Gazette.
Well, because MCDP 7 is learning.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. Which is kind of a function, right?
I would hope so. It's continuous, like chow, man.
Yeah.
It's continuous.
All right. Anything stand out in there that you want to mention beyond, the preamble?
Again, I mean, understanding the terms of information is important going forward. So I definitely recommend dwelling and potentially rereading, especially Chapter 1. But they also, I like it, because what I've seen, like, they go into, like, they try to do vignettes and how to get their points across, which especially if you read the Marine Corps Gazette, it's a very good way to teach new ideas and concepts through storytelling to make an argument. So
Yeah,
again, it's an easy read. It's a good read. Please read it.
Yeah, that's sort of like meta, because you need to read the narrative to sort of understand the narrative, and obviously information operations has a very distinct narrative, and for any of us fans of storytelling, there has to be an arc. Again, there's nothing superfluous in information operations, man. It all matters. So yeah.
All right, so MCDP-8, the hottest bit of new Marine Corps news. Now let's look at the hottest little bit of new military and general news. We got 2 new allies on the docket to join NATO.
Yeah.
So for those who don't know, Sweden and Finland have been... They've pretty much gone through the initial phases of joining NATO, and now we're just...
Turkey signed off on it.
Yeah, Turkey signed off on it. So every member of NATO has now accepted that they will be able to join NATO. Now there's a bunch of, terms and, like how much do they have to contribute and all this kind of stuff to be worked out. But got some Scandinavian countries joining NATO. It's pretty fresh.
It's interesting, especially as we're talking about nested campaign plans. I would suggest that I don't think it was in Russia's end state that by attacking Ukraine that we would add 2 more countries to NATO. So, yeah, I think that's a very, very interesting development. And it really, as we start to unpack things that are going on in Ukraine, I think it's a real head-scratcher at this point as to why Russia even wants to continue this invasion. It seems
they're doubling down on a dying energy brand, that being oil.
Yeah, it's
we're up to 10% of global energy is produced by wind and solar.
Let's get those are rookie numbers.
Those are rookie numbers.
Let's get them up.
I think we're globally at 7% nuclear.
Also get those rookie numbers way up.
I don't know what we really got to invest in nuclear, but
as the Simpsons, man, the Simpsons turned off an entire generation of nuclear.
Well, there's
Homer Simpson is your QC guy.
Yeah,
there's a documentary that responds to the recent one about 3 Mile Island that kind of talks about how that whole situation, just from a PR standpoint, as far as the nuclear industry is concerned, was just completely boondoggled.
I think it was on Netflix. I'm sure you can find it somewhere else, but I thought it was called
Meltdown.
Well, there was another one. It was called Pandora's. It's not Pandora's Box. That would be too on the nose. But it was like it is Pandora's whatever, and it does talk a lot about how the sort of the boondoggle of the nuclear rollout, and how they just really let some of these other industries tank them. When at the end of the day, it's probably the best way to go.
When you see the numbers for what the output is for fossil fuels, as far as what's getting in the air, as far as just radiation, versus everything that comes out of every nuclear power plant on Earth, since nuclear power plants have been introduced, doesn't add up to what fossil fuels put out in an hour.
Well, and there's just so much and there's so much empirical, intuitive empirical disinformation. I'll say, and being someone that surfed right near major when you feel that warm water coming out of there, it's hard not to think that it's fucking nuclear charged, right? But it's just warm water because it has to cool the coils. But you always are just like, oh, I'm losing, my ability to reproduce at this moment.
Well, recently too, they started doing some of their high. The high radiation storage above ground, just because it's so encased and so safe. People saw that, because you can see it from the hills. Like, is that nuclear waste out there? And they started protesting outside of it, but it's just
So it's
well, this was a tangent. The point is, Russia is doubling down on oil. Supposedly, they needed to secure Crimea for that, and while they're at it, they're like, well, Ukraine should be in Russia anyway because bread and oil, I don't know. It really feels like it's always Occam's razor. It's like, so there's probably all these other tertiary things going on, but you boil it down, energy. So it was the way they controlled Europe, and Europe was changing, and they needed more of the energy. So it feels like that's what's going on. That's kind of the prevailing narrative right now. And it doesn't make sense because they're like, oh, don't join NATO. Oh, everybody's joining NATO. Switzerland's re-examining being in the EU. The
Ukraine's going through the EU process.
Yep, they're going
interview
through it
process
too.
right now.
Switzerland's
So.
got it started. Yeah.
Yeah, it just really it's a real head scratcher, man. I it would be so easy to just chalk it up to like ineptitude, but
Yeah.
that's not fair.
Well,
or
I
that's
think
not
the-
accurate. I don't think.
when studying history, especially military history, the thing whenever you start a war, it's never going to go the way you plan it to go. Very seldomly does that ever happen. So I think, looking how Russia has conducted the war from start to where it is now, I don't think that they foresaw A, lasting this long, B, being as bloody as it was, and C, devolving the way it has. Starting off, I guess going deep into our conversation, I think that Russia kind of had like they looked at I think the invasion of not Iraqi freedom, Desert Storm. They used I think they used Desert Storm as a model to how they can quickly topple a foreign country. Oh, and Iraqi freedom actually, yeah. As
initial invasion.
The initial
19 days?
Yeah.
invasion part, but this is how we can topple a foreign regime relatively quickly. Unfortunately, they didn't have the training, the material, the expertise necessary to do like a maneuver as victory, to do a quick knockout punch, and then as a consequence of that, it's become more attritional, as we saw recently, because as of I believe this past weekend, the Russians have taken the city of. Again, I'm an American. I'm doing my best. Please double check not only our sources but our pronunciation. They've taken the city of Luhansk.
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 Let's just pronounce it how we see it. Luhansk. Which is a city and a region, so it gets confusing sometimes.
It does, but
and a river, I think.
Are you
isn't it?
talking about Lysychansk?
Yes.
Okay.
Lysychansk.
And then there's that's one of the twin towns, right? There's
'Cause
another
there's-
one right across the river from it.
Luhansk is the region.
Yeah.
Yes.
But Lysychansk.
Guys, why did we not study Ukrainian
I
geography
know,
in
so
4th
silly.
grade? A failure
We
of the
did a lot of
education
research
system.
before we came in the booth today.
But yeah, so
Yeah.
in all seriousness, so the Russians recently took Lysychansk in a long, drawn-out attritional battle, and what they attempted to do originally, use armored mechanized unit airborne forces to make deep penetrations and hopefully collapse the Ukrainian command system, failed. So now they've devolved to what Russians are really good at. If you look at Grozny, for example, just blow the place to fucking hell.
Yeah.
And
just level it.
then you march your infantry in, and then you're going to take casualties in the process of doing it. Consolidate your gains, and then look for another bite and hold kind of a reminiscent of. Again, it's terrifying to think of the implications of this if larger conflicts were to happen, but because of the parity of technology between Ukraine and Russia, they're very very similar, and you can make the argument that the technology has evolved so quickly that they don't know how to use it. And it's kind of very much similar to like a World War I situation where because you have created such great killing power on the surface, the safest place on the battlefield is in a 6-foot hole. And so you see like a lot of almost reinvention of trench warfare happening in Ukraine, and Russia relying heavily on attrition and artillery with a long logistical train in order to support that.
Yeah, and then you give Ukraine some HIMARS, which kind of have the range to fire back. We didn't give them very many. I think we gave them, 6? But, that changes the game a little bit out there, too, because they can't just...
One pod, or whatever the launcher system is called, it covers an entire grid square
Yeah.
of effects. So it's a gnarly indirect fire tool, whereas obviously like a 777, which they have, I think, in the 30s, they have 30-something.
They got a bunch of them recently, yeah.
It obviously it's a point. Like you give them a 10-digit grid, and it's going to hit that.
Yeah,
grid.
and that's a battery fire too, where you
Yeah,
roll
yeah.
up, shoot, and get out of town before they
you're
fire
adjusting
back.
fires. Yeah, you're doing calls for fire. With the HIMARS, man, you just sort of.
Yeah.
It's just I think they're in this region. Don't worry, we got this.
It's not a precision thing. It's a touch screen. You can put a big fat thumb on there, and they're like, there it is. Actually, I haven't been inside one, so I doubt that. But
the consequence, though, it's
devastating.
Ukraine on both sides has become a meat grinder, and in the most horrible way to think about. I've seen reports where it's somewhere between 100 to 200 Ukrainians soldiers are dying per day.
Yeah, I saw that.
Not counting. I've seen some sources estimate that around 800 to 1,000 or 500 to 1,000 wounded per day as well. Russian sources were obviously not going to get much on them, but I mean, judging by footage and reports, it can't be pretty.
I mean, I think it was as of April they had lost more in those few months than we had lost in the entire 20-year war.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're casually. I mean, if you just go on Wikipedia, which uses a variety of sources, it's between like 10 to 36. I think Ukrainians say that we've killed 36,000 Russians. I think U.S. or U.K. estimates are around between 10 to 16,000, rough estimates. But I mean, regardless, in a 130-some day war, those aren't numbers you want to be seeing.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
And Russia will report a lot of. Well, they won't report on like pro-Russian like Donetskians or Georgians.
Right.
Or not Georgians.
The separatist forces.
Yeah, like the
Ossetians, I guess. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So.
It's interesting too. I guess going back to what you were saying, William, which I think is really good insight on. I think Michael, Dr. Hunziker talked about this, how it's really hard to use like sort of these brush fire wars as an opportunity for learning and to use that as a model to then tailor your own forces. And I think that once again, his insight sort of proves out, because if you want to look at things that we had done or the West had done, and then looking at Russia's own history in Georgia and Chechnya. The one thing about that is that and obviously World According to Vic, but I think where they may have lost sight of, or they may have gotten too inflated with their own successes, was that those regions are isolated from the West.
Mm-hmm.
You can level Grozny because no one from the West is coming in to support
and
that.
this also in a time where social media and news was nowhere near what it is
True,
now.
information operations were not what they
You
were.
would just see the pictures in the AP every once in a while, like, wow, that sucks, but not
Or
really have the
the
impact
Russians are
of
brutal,
it. Yeah.
right? But then you do it in a country that is not only connected with Europe, but has ideology, has a identity.
Is actively trying to westernise.
Has a very pro-Western government.
Mm-hmm.
It's a calculus, man, that you have to consider. And
they definitely have won the PR war. Ukraine has, to the point where people are crowdfunding. Drones. Yeah. So even though they crowdfunded them, and then the Turkish company, I don't have the note right in front of me. It starts with a B. Just donated them. They're like, we don't want your money. We're just gonna give them to them.
Yeah.
So,
which that's a
yeah.
What is it? You got it's a Bayraktar.
Yeah, that's the name of the drone. So
I
can't remember the company name actually.
Which we saw how devastating the Turkish UAS stuff was in the clash between Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Yeah, and the Aktash.
Yeah. And that actually kind of just to kind of move ourselves along here, because we wanted to talk about recent Gazette Marinus article.
About
how Russia. They're arguing that Russia is doing a form of maneuver warfare, and you guys both kind of challenge that.
One of the Marinus is a collaboration of several. So for context, Marinus is a collaboration of several. We'll say experts or relevant figures in the field. And they switched the conversation away from talking about Marine Corps maneuver warfare to now like the Russian Ukraine conflict. So I believe, Vic, they've released 2 articles so far on like part 1 and part 2 on the Russian Ukraine. And you have a bone to pick with one of the articles. What's up?
So I understand where Marinus is coming from, but basically what they did in was it 22? Marinus 22 is they tried to look at
the most recent one.
The most recent one, yeah, I think it was. Regardless, the one that's on the shelves currently, it is they try to look at the Russian, try to look at this invasion from the Russian standpoint, and to make the argument that really it looks like a total cluster, but actually what they were doing is maneuver warfare. And they don't go so far as to say effective maneuver warfare, but they do try to make the argument that it is a form of. And the argument that Marinus makes is that by diverting all the attention towards Kyiv and attacking from the north, that it forced the Ukrainians to dedicate their forces to that northern front, which then opened the gap for them to then really execute what it is they're trying to do, and that is to annex and bring in all of the southern countries, or territories.
The Donbass region, yeah.
The Donbass,
Yeah.
and all going out to Odessa even, I think, is what Marinus is
They want the
arguing.
whole coast, yeah.
Yeah, they take the coast to get their warm weather port and to bring in those ethnic Russians into the fold and then call it a day. And I guess maybe on, as a thought experiment, sure, that could work. I guess the bone that I have to pick, or where I take sort of issue with that analysis, is that if we talk maneuver warfare versus attrition warfare, is that if once you realize that this gap is a surface, you have to adjust. And the fact that they have taken the effort in the north was a complete disaster, even through the lens of a deception operation or a feint or something that would, essentially draw these forces away. When you look then at the success that they've had in the South, you have to just wonder, like, okay, maybe, again, on paper, that seemed like a good idea, but now that we're in the execution phase and you're completely unable to adjust and to change what it is you're doing, they're no longer looking for surfaces and gaps. They're just going full steam ahead. And so, and maybe it's more to your point, William, about, hey, they're looking at these things and they're trying to mimic it, but they don't have the ability to do that. And that's why this is going on. But I would argue that maybe what on paper can be seen as a form of maneuver warfare, I would say that it quickly devolved into attrition warfare, and their inability to adapt and overcome the resistance they got through the Ukrainians has shown that this is, if it's an argument for maneuver warfare, then it's a poor argument for maneuver warfare.
Well, it could be highlighting the risks of maneuver warfare, and as you mentioned, like realizing that like this gap is not a gap, this gap's a surface, and this surface is, or a gap, or this other surface is a stronger surface than we thought it would be. So their inability to pivot and actually apply it in how it's supposed to be, realizing that you need to make changes on the go based on the information you're getting and the results of your movements has been, it could be a great, I mean, again, like, because we're still talking speculative, and historians are going to be debating this from years to come after. But it could have been, I believe, in aspiration, they wanted to mimic what a lot of Western countries have been able to successfully pull off, but failing to actually have the means to do that, to do maneuver warfare. They're back to the default.
Yeah, that's good. I think about combat learning, or dying to learn, Dr. Hunziker's book, and sort of maybe I could be losing the forest through the losing the forest through the trees, and that there is learning and that there is adaptation occurring. It's just happening at such a micro level. But I will say, though, that when you're considering maneuver warfare, or you're trying to look at things through maneuver warfare, and even going back to our earlier discussion about the MCDPs, is that you have to look at all of the things that are incorporated into maneuver, and it's not just the FLOT. It's not just the forward line of troops. Like, there's service support, there's mutually supporting efforts that have to play in, and we see that, like, the Russians seemingly cannot support something as complex as maneuver warfare because they failed to support logistically a lot of this, especially when you're talking about
like the operational
on multiple
level.
fronts. I would even say it's strategic, because one of the things they did, if you were to look at it as Marinus did, like, hey, there's this northern front, then we're going to sort of sweep and do a big hook there in the bottom. Like, we've diverted all your forces this way, now we're going to come and take you from the side on a flanking and envelopment. They lost their logistics. And so what ended up happening is that those forces in the center, when they weren't taken, they just moved a few miles over and cut their lines.
Yeah.
I mean, all the way to the Russian border. And so I don't know how that's maybe that's maneuver. Maybe it's not very good maneuver when you shift your forces south and then they get cut off.
Well, even like attrition warfare, you have to maneuver. So, like, you're got to draw a line in there
Right,
somewhere.
fair enough, yeah.
And so, at what macro, meso, micro level is, like, can you even look at it? Like, because that is
There has to be a
very
level of attrition,
strategic.
right.
Yeah, so that's a very strategic move to try and say that
I think
our feint from Belarus. I put air quotes up for the feint, guys. This is an audio medium. Our feint from Belarus, where we had, what was it, 45,000 Russian
Stretched
troops?
over
Yeah, like
40 miles.
coming in with logistical backing from Lukashenko and the Belarusian war machine government. Like, I don't know, probably one and the same. Could not penetrate and stay. Like they just were slapped side to side, and they had initiative. They had certain advantages. To that, just completely fail. Could you, in that maneuver environment, argue that those losses are acceptable? Like, that feels very attrition-y.
Can
to
I
me.
put just a pause? Like, let's clarify some terms, because like understanding the difference between maneuver and attrition warfare is. I mean, it took me years taking the time as a Gazette editor to actually read these documents to really get it. There is maneuver and attrition warfare, and there is attrition and maneuver warfare. But the idea is, I think the key difference between the two is the mindset which you go forth. Where in maneuver warfare, your idea is you're attacking your enemy cognitively, and then attrition it's more physically. And so part of attacking them cognitively is having a command structure that allows for flexibility and initiative. Rather, when attritionally, it's more, it's still rather top down.
Yep, so maneuver, I guess, in an overly simplistic version, would be you're attacking the will of the enemy to fight, versus attrition, where you're attacking their material.
Or the ground where they're located
and you're trying to incapacitate them to continue to fight, or you're both are trying to incapacitate them. It's just one, you're incapacitating their morale, their mental faculties. The other one, you're actually attacking facilities.
So it feels like then they were making an attempt at one while doing the other, because they were landing troops at airfields. They were shelling the city. They were.
So shock and awe is like the bumper sticker, right, from maneuver warfare. That like, I'm so shocked and awe that I can't function. Like, no matter what I do, I will lose. So I'm just gonna stop fighting.
You start so many mental fires faster than they could put out, where the entire thing just is unable to sustain itself because
and then
there's no cohesion.
Attrition would eventually be like, oh, I'm gonna fight you, and then I just get bludgeoned, and like I can't fight you anymore.
Yeah. So. There might be some, because, warfare and political warfare and economic warfare are also interlinked these days. That might have not been a supportable maneuver warfare maneuver that just was attrition warfare, but as a result, like, does that make sense?
Going back to my earlier comment, I think the problem was they strove for maneuver warfare, but it was being fought by attritionists.
Okay.
Like, because again, like I'm making assumptions. I'm making educated guesses based on the information I've seen. Again, please, everyone, do your own research. Do everything for what it seems like. It's just like there wasn't a lot of initiative taking down the lower ranks. It was very structured. I mean, especially looking at the drive to Kiev, it's almost like Operation Market Garden. It was just like the one road from that direction from the city, and it's very easy to sever those lines of communication and cause havoc along the way. But because there was not enough initiative shown, and because again it was a very tight command structure, it failed. And then looking again towards the eastern side of the conflict, it was pretty much
bomb them into submission.
It became again, like going back to Grozny. It was just a rinse and repeat of traditional Russian doctrine, like understanding we have weight in numbers, we have weight in power, we have a better logistical train than Ukraine at this moment, and so they realized that we can send more men in and we can bomb you. So they did that.
Yeah.
And I guess to your point though, Nick, like it's also problematic to look at the results, and I fall victim to this as well. Again, you're talking about dying to learn. Like, it's very easy to sort of just toss out the German doctrine and their learning, their combat learning, because they lost World War I.
Yeah.
When you actually look at it, like, well, actually they did more. They just didn't have as much stuff, or they were just in sort of a really disadvantaged position to begin with, blah, blah, blah. And so I think in a one way, it's really easy to look at sort of what's going on in Ukraine and be like, man, the Russians are, they're a football bat. Like, they have no idea what they're doing. Maybe there is a lens.
Well, realizing that they're good at attrition warfare has gotten them results. Now, whether those results have definitely have achieved them some tactical success. Strategic success is less to be seen at the moment. I don't think we can judge exactly what it is.
But even the tactical success is, like, if we were to look at it the way that Marinus wants us to look at it, or he wants to give us to explore that. Like, all right, so let's just take, I guess, where they're at. So they do the northern advance. It opens up a gap. Now they try to sweep through the south to achieve their strategic objectives. But at the tactical level, they're making such incremental progress.
Yeah.
And they're taking a ton of losses. And to the point where now you have two countries joining NATO that had no real zeal to do that in the beginning.
You've unified the EU in a way it's not been unified.
It's creating a ton of domestic unrest. They're taking losses. There's just at the strategic global level, there's so much that is not going well for them.
But yeah, I mean, again, I don't know. It's not to say that they should be completely down in the dumps. I mean, they've able to rebound their ruble. They've shifted their economy in a way to make it's a lot of duct tape and glue, but it's working. They've made incremental tactical advances, and right now, I mean, they especially with taking, they still have the initiative in this war at the moment, and it's kind of at a lull. I mean, Putin just released like a notice to his troops who fought in Lysychansk that take some time to recoup and recover. So that means they're potentially ceding the initiative, or the initiative is up in the air at the moment, and whether Ukraine is able to, because President Zelensky has been very apparent on his stance on what territory is Ukraine and what territory is Russia. Are they going to have the capabilities to then seize initiative on their own, or it's
so? Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. Like with the ruble, the initial impact, we see how volatile markets are. Like if you threaten with a 3/4 rise in a Fed rate hike, where it hasn't even happened yet, markets fall. Right. So the first thing that happened with the ruble was it took a big hit, and then it went way too high, and now it's going back down again. It's just we've made it volatile, and that's not good for any country if you're having that volatile of a thing. So there's, I don't know, and now there's kind of a, I don't know quite how to describe it, but other than the old ways of the USSR and their republics is all kind of dying off all around Russia, too.
It just makes me wonder too about what Russia is going to look like when the dust finally settles on this thing, which we may not. That's another, I guess. Looking at sort of, we like to, as a Marine Corps in particular, like to pat ourselves on the back on maneuver warfare when we look at the invasion of Iraq. I mean, 19 days we're in Baghdad. Pulling down Saddam Hussein statues, and it was very similar. We had us sort of doing this, massive movement, and then we were going to take a quick right into Al-Qut, and then the army was going to sweep through and take Baghdad. They get sort of bogged down in the airport. We don't want to lose the initiative, so we shift down and then do a sort of a double entendre right there on Baghdad. But we bypassed, obviously, a ton of stuff to maintain that momentum. We had a lull because we'd sort of outstretched our logistics. So we needed time for some of that to catch up. And so we went, quote-unquote, fedayeen hunting there in Diwania, blah, blah, blah. So we like to pat ourselves on the back. It's that was maneuver warfare. But then because of all of that, we didn't do enough attrition when we made that really horrible call to disband the military. Now all of a sudden they had a ton of material because we didn't do enough attrition, and then we get bogged down in a 10-year war in Iraq, and then ultimately a 20-year war in the GWAT. All that is to say is that is Russia necessarily prepared to do that? Because the Ukrainians certainly have made it clear that they're not going to succumb to this. And so we look at all right, so does then Russia become sort of a vassal state of China, because that's the only real
It's
way
looking that way.
can
That's how
sort
the
of-
ruble got saved. So
Again, I mean, as we mentioned a few
Saved.
episodes, I mean, we are in a completely new geopolitical era, coming from a 27-year-old like copy editor for the Marine Corps Gazette from the world according to William. Where I mean, a lot could happen in the future geopolitically that could really shake things up. I mean, like Germany is struggling with their energy issue, which could change up a lot of things. As we mentioned in one of the articles that Nick gave us, I mean, the yield for their grain
oh yeah,
is down, which will
Russia
have.
is
Way
using
down.
food as a weapon.
And
Yep.
if the nitrate issue comes worse, I mean, that's a lot of geopolitical leverage Russia could gain.
yeah.
It could be like like for instance, we could just be seeing the House of Cards collapse, which is
Well, yeah,
a
'cause
terrifying
and
thought.
sort of this, one of the things you'd mentioned was Kazakhstan.
Yeah. Hey, Future Nick here. We're about to have a full brain fart on who we're talking about. We're talking about Nursultan Nazarbayev. Yeah, I was trying to lean into that earlier.
Yeah,
but
so I
we
mean,
kinda
that's
back on the thing. So Kazakhstan had, as they were de-Sovietizing, had a very, very, very powerful president. I think you got his name in front of you there. And he recently left office. Now his successor has started stripping him of all of his powers, all of his nepotism, all this other stuff, and pretty much defunded him post leaving office, even though he did get a new capital named after him. They moved from Almaty into his city with his name on it.
Yeah,
But,
I would butcher it if I tried.
I know, right? But their money was tied to the ruble, and part of that whole energy crisis thing that just happened there led to a whole bunch of protests and all this other stuff. Because Kazakhstan is minerally like one of the wealthiest countries on earth. Like it's the 8th largest. It covers a lot of land. There's just a lot of mineral wealth there, probably to be exploited. But they've recently just done a whole bunch of very Western-looking types of reforms to their constitution. I think they just passed a referendum to pass like 72 amendments to their constitution to kind of decentralize it, which makes them not as good of friends with Russia, but Russia's a little busy right now. It kind of affects the relationship with China. So we'll see how
Yeah,
that
so,
kind of plays out.
as you mentioned, the House of Cards, I think that's a good sort of analogy for this, because as we look at Russia's inability to handle their brush fires or the potential brush fires along their periphery, China are they going to step in? Are they not? Are these areas going to become sort of disputed? If you were to look at, like, if there is such a thing, but like, you were to look at their board of where they see themselves, China being, if you look at their board of where they see themselves in 2030, 2050.
Their vision board.
Is there a big like swath over parts of Russia where they anticipate having to sort of step in and take control, which is why they're maintaining this alliance where it's like, careful of, careful who you sleep with sort of thing.
It's the world order that we've been comfortable growing up in since the end of World War II, and this is furthermore by the end of the Cold War is up for grabs. It seems like.
What is we talk about? What is the Chinese
Xi
strategy
Jinping?
game?
Oh,
no,
wait.
the Chinese
Oh.
strategy
Go.
game. Me Wei.
Mahjong?
No, it's not Mahjong.
Go?
It's the chess game that has all the little pieces. And actually, there's a bit of article.
I think you're talking about Go, aren't you talking
Yeah,
about
Go. I believe.
Where they got like the little yin yang pieces, white on one
No,
side,
no,
black
that's
on the other?
Mahjong. It's not Mahjong.
No, Mahjong has like the little
The tiles.
dominoes, the little
Yeah.
tiles.
Little-
I think you're talking
It's
about
May Wei or something like that. There's a Gazette article that talks about the difference between a way of thinking about things in terms of chess. If I was thinking about this Chinese game,
I really think you're thinking about Go. I know it's probably
G-O?
Go.
Look at it. It's like MEIWEI or something like that. Anyways, but that is sort of allegorical to the idea that like we in the West think about things in a very short, decisive way, and the Chinese sort of look at things in a more a long, drawn out sort of conflict, using a lot of things like deception.
Yeah, it's Go.
Is it Go?
It's Go.
Get out of town. All right.
But I mean, yeah.
But sort of, I guess the thing I'm trying to highlight though is that it's this idea that like we may be so focused on all of these things because we're so sort of West centric, like we're only concerned about what's going to happen to our stuff, and this may be just some massive plan within the Chinese sort of long game that like really their end game is to take more parts of Russia.
Absolutely. The Russian-Ukrainian war has done nothing but benefit China. It's drawn the West's attention, especially the United States, away from I mean, yeah.
But if you want to recapture, like, if really the motivation of any regime is to recapture its old stuff,
they've got
if you look
stuff.
if you look at the Khans in the Mongol Empire, it had way more Russia stuff than it had Southeast Asian stuff.
Remember, the Mongols conquered China. China didn't conquer. Yeah, like
understood.
Yeah, but well, also like, they are opportunists. Like they saw how it's shifted, especially the United States' attention away from the Pacific and Asia to Europe. Now, it's maintained the focus. We see less news about Taiwan recently. We haven't heard much about that. It's pitted essentially. It's Russia is partly doing the job for China, making the United States especially spend billions and billions of dollars on sending money to Ukraine versus focusing on our internal domestic politics and B shoring up our flank against China in the Pacific. So by being almost bystanders to this and they've benefited a lot from it, and also they're learning lessons. They're realizing like what they can and can't do militarily, what they would need to do for their own potential incursion into Taiwan should that hopefully never happen. But they're learning their lessons and applying it and seeing what reaction times would be like, how the West would respond, to what extent would they respond. So it's been great for them.
I'd challenge that. There's a lot of reasons why economically and
whatnot.
the main thing that is they're not out of the news. Like they've been buzzing planes in international airspace, like nearly causing accidents.
Yeah, but how many billions of dollars are we diverting then to counter that?
But we get to in Ukraine finally take a playbook out of the Russian playbook and just only contribute money and material, and we can just see how it works out. We don't have to invest personnel there, and that's something that we've never historically been fans of. We always like to get our hands dirty.
I'm not saying that this conflict hasn't benefited us intellectually as it should.
I think that's money we're going to spend anyway. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't think that we are hurting ourselves
after we left billions of dollars of equipment in Afghanistan, of course we needed to send money elsewhere.
Yeah.
Sorry, here comes the cynical person.
I love it. I think the coffers, and we could bring Tim Howe back in here and we could talk about, the pots of money. Yeah. Obviously, the coffers run deep in many of these wells. But at the same time, I think it takes like one of the things we're losing a lot of is like the mental capital. I guess I think about like Charlie Wilson's war, for example, is that when it's in the public consciousness, you get a ton of money sent to your initiative. Once it falls out, so to your example, like everybody who wants to like focus on Taiwan, like, hey, don't forget about one of the things we talked about in our meeting earlier, like all the people who still want us to focus on ISIS because they haven't gone away.
Yeah.
Like those coffers are probably they're penny pinching right now because everybody's pulling, or just the focus is their staffs are dropping or assets. They don't have priority on ISR anymore and blah blah blah. But,
Yeah, but the Russian energy not being available to Europe affects global markets, and China is super reliant on global markets. A lot of the places
to them that's short term. If we're talking about Go, if that's the correct game we're referring to, I mean, again,
I think this
it's
is
too
more of
early
a
to tell.
setback for China than them sitting back like, ooh, look at how good everything's going for China right now. You know what I mean? Like
Well,
it's
Yeah.
It could, again, we don't also we have access to like some of their grand strategic vision, but the only way the history will tell.
Yeah, they've
Yeah.
got so many domestic issues too. Because I mean, when we
Yeah.
say world markets, like they're not.
yeah, they're having huge issues
and the
with
COVID is still-
land development and all that stuff. Also, Xi Jinping has been making a point of trying to whip up nationalistic fervor that can only go so far if it doesn't get an outlet.
Yeah, I mean,
And-
we're well overdue for a riot in Hong Kong.
Yeah. And I think that they're probably looking inward as much as anything right now because when things aren't going well internally, because they locked down for COVID hardcore and they're still not through it, and they have some weird strains of Omicron going on over there. That
Well, they're about to become a geriatric state too.
yeah, they've already passed that mark.
Oh, have they?
Yeah, there's more old people than young people. I can't remember what the age for that is. 26, 27. It's it's a much younger age than you would think. So they're now starting to be older than younger, which is a problem that we always talk about with Social Security and whatnot. Difference between us and them is we import hundreds of thousands of immigrants all the time just to kind of keep the balance. Different conversation.
Yes.
So yeah, they got to be looking internally because younger people are more likely to act up. Older people are more happy with it. Older people aren't going to fight the fight. You know what I mean? Like they're going to sit in and tell everybody how wrong they are.
Graybeards, but
Yeah.
no one is
But old people economies don't grow.
right.
So they might be looking at a peaking economy anyway, especially
Well, they had a
if global
brain
trade
drain
goes down.
in the teens as well.
Yep.
A lot of kids going off to Western schools and not
Yep.
coming back.
Yep. So, and they don't always want them to come back if they get out sometimes because they're going to come in and spread bad ideas.
Yeah.
So, I don't think that.
Well, one thing that definitely ties us together is we're all in a soup sandwich.
Yeah.
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 History is being made every day, and we are just the poor victims
Links us
of it.
together in our dysfunction.
All right, guys. Well,
we
we've been
truly are a global family.
we've been chatting for a while with that. Speaking of that soup sandwich to end on, there's no end of stuff to talk about. But we've
Right.
been.
But if you want us to talk about anything, please reach out to us on our email or social media or whatever works for you. If you want us to dive into any more topics, we got Vic back. We're in the office. Let's get some good conversations going. We have a lot of cool stuff coming up for you, but please, we appreciate your feedback.
Scuttlebutt at mcamarines.org is our email. You can find us on Reddit at MCA Scuttlebutt. You can Google MCA Scuttlebutt and find
All kinds of cool
all kinds of
resources.
stuff.
Like we totally were shooting from the hip on this bad boy. So, please, like, if we totally jack something up, call us on it.
You know what? No press, no bad press. All press is good press.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to say.
But I want
so
good-
someone
good
finds
press.
something very, very specific, very peculiar that we might have gotten wrong, and just make it blow up.
Yeah.
10,000 views. Let's get it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's plenty to
Yeah.
work with on this
Yeah.
episode. Pronunciation.
Yeah.
The name of Chinese chess games.
Yeah. Do the Go thing. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this and you know what game Vic's trying to talk about that's
Yeah,
not
man,
Go,
I'm telling you.
please.
I think we've had articles on both Go and this other game like Way. I think you're not completely off.
Thank you.
I just
appreciate
typed
you
in
saying
like
that.
Way, and it pulled up like a Chinese restaurant in my neighborhood. So,
Yeah.
I was trying to do Go versus Way something,
Yeah,
and
it's
it was like bringing it up.
Mayway, the
Yeah.
MEIWEI.
And it was bringing up,
right,
like-
but man, I'm an idiot.
It was like bringing up two different international like internet services, and I'm like,
Yeah, and also too, I just want to say, like, as a disclaimer, I've never claimed to be smart. So,
I don't-
like, this is all par for the
This
course.
is. I claimed to be smart like 20 years ago.
God bless you.
Yeah, I think I was 14.
Yeah.
Thought I was pretty good. It's hot stuff as a teenager, I tell you what. Anyway, yeah. So reach out to us,
A lot of material to
please,
work with.
please. If you have listened for an hour and 10 minutes at this point, and you want to chime in about Go versus Way, the first comment on our Reddit thread about it, I'll pull something out of the Marine shop and I will send it to you.
Yeah.
I will send it to you. I'll send you a T-shirt. I'll send you a cup.
we'll send you a
I don't
magazine.
know. It's a giveaway. I'm not going to give you a magazine. You should already have that. All right. So I'll keep an eye on the Reddit thread. First person to talk about Go or Way.
Mayway.
Way.
Yeah.
Mei Jinping.
All right.
Chinese chess, baby.
Yeah, consider this a giveaway. If somebody chimes in on that Reddit thread by next Monday, I'm going to reach out to you. I'm going to get your address. I'm going to send you something nice. All right, guys. One more time, we're going to thank Service Credit Union, and then we'll see you all next week.
Thanks for tuning in.
Bye.
This episode of Scuttlebutt is sponsored by Service Credit Union. Our friends at Service Credit Union have been serving military, veterans, and their families for over 65 years. You might know that they provide mortgages, including VA loans as well as auto and personal loans. But did you know that they now have a loan specifically for the iBot mobility device? For those who don't know, the iBot is a revolutionary device that goes above and beyond what a traditional mobility device can do. It can go up curbs, navigate stairs and snow, and even rise up to 6 feet. Of course, this device also comes with a high cost that isn't usually covered by insurance. So Service Credit Union has stepped in to help provide its members with financing, with no money down and terms up to 72 months. For more details, visit servicecu.org/iBot.
Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. I am Nick Wilson. That is Major Vic Ruble, U.S. Marine Corps retired. We have also heard the voices of or contributions from William Treuting or Nancy Lichtman, editors of Gazette and Leatherneck magazines respectively. Opinions expressed in Scuttlebutt are just that, opinions, and do not represent any official stance of the MCA.